Good evening, friends. Jai Bhim. Today is 2nd January, and it is observed as Martyrs' Day in Odisha, in Kalinga Nagar. As we all know, as most of people following things happening in Odisha are aware of, that on 2006, on 2nd January, on the early morning of 2nd January, there was a brutal crackdown by the Odisha State Police on villages of a scheduled tribe community in the district of Jajpur, which is in central Odisha. And that brutal action by the police led to the death of several people, including children and women. It was absolutely unexpected that on the second day of a new year, the Odisha police would do that. And well, that's what happened, and it led to some outrage and outcry across the state, across the country, across the world. But as I said, to some amount of outrage and outcry, not to the extent that one expected such a shocking incident would have impacted upon our politics. The reason for that, the singular reason for that, is not just because Odisha government is very good at covering up its mistakes. Instead, I strongly believe it is because of the particular corporation that was involved, the company for which the land was to be acquired in Kalinga Nagar industrial estate in Jajpur district. It was Tata. So Tata happens to be one of those companies, corporations, which is more than a century old. It's one of those colonial era corporations that has survived and remained, or rather become bigger and stronger than ever. In fact, most of the big corporations alongside Tata, global corporations of that era, of the colonial era, are hardly to be seen today, but Tata is there. And in fact, Tata is doing things which newer companies in Western countries are doing. For instance, Rockefeller is not making Apple computers, but Tata is still making consumer goods. In fact, Tata is a company that has hundreds of brands. But the thing is, what happened in Kalinga Nagar is a very, it's a kind of a very long story, and it spans across a century or more. And what happened in 2006 is a culmination of everything that had happened before it. And it did not stop with this brutal crackdown. In fact, it was a stepping up of repression, not only in Kalinga Nagar, but across the state of Odisha. And in fact, at that point of time, across Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, West Bengal, parts of Andhra Pradesh. I'll come to it because there's a timeline that we have to follow to understand what happened. And to start with, most of my work is sort of revolves around this day, and I will start by just sharing what happened on 2nd January 2006 with me. I was somewhere outside Odisha in another city with a friend, and it was New Year's time, so I was just like anybody else having a holiday. And on 3rd January morning, I see Times of India. That was the paper that had friend was subscribing, and I see the news that at that point of time they said the first news I think mentioned 9 people having been killed in Kalinga Nagar, and by evening the numbers went up to 10, 11, 12, and at first there was not much of clear detail coming out from the area about what had really happened. The police had its own version, and the people's versions were slowly coming out because of the kind of the amount of police that had been deployed in the area, and roads had been barricaded. So it was not easy for everybody to reach there, but ultimately people did reach there, and then one came to know that on the morning of 2nd January 2006, the district administration had arrived with workers and several platoons of police to start the construction of a boundary wall on the land of the villagers. And when people woke up in the morning and they saw this sort of activity happening, they tried to stop it. In fact, people say that when they were walking towards the site where the wall was being constructed, the people say that the fields had been planted with mines, like explosives, and an explosion occurred where the first 2 or 3 people got killed. And that explosion caused a lot of chaos in the area. And when people started coming out from their homes and from gathering at that site, the police started firing at them. And in the police firing, several people were injured and received critical wounds. There is no clear number, but from my own estimate, it would be at least 100 people who were very critically injured. At least 100 people very critically injured. And then what the people say is that many of the people who were later declared to be dead were actually alive when the police had picked them up, and that they had been killed during the transit from that site to the hospital. So in other words, the victims who had been injured were killed by the police while being transported in the ambulance. This is what the people said. They say that this was a kind of a revenge of the police, because when the firing happened and when the explosion happened, and in that chaos, the people also tried to push back, and that whole process, one policeman also died. So the villagers believed that the policeman's death enraged the police force, and they, as a form of revenge, they killed the wounded people as well. Most of the injured people did not receive formal medical treatment, and they had, because as we have seen in many of such conflicts, going to a hospital and allowing is a form of surrendering to the police, because eventually the police would frame everybody in cases and lock them up. So that day after the firing, people started, of course, gathering, and activists also gathered, media people gathered. Footage of the funeral was available. It's there on our channel also, you can see it. There was even some recording, which I have heard from local media people, that there was a recording of the action by the police, and that footage was kind of suppressed, buried, and the person who shot it was put under great pressure, and the evidence for what had really happened was one never could see. And this is why our work started becoming about documenting these conflicts, so that there is a recorded document of what had really transpired. And after this incident, me and other friends, we have intervened in various ways to ensure that documentation, video documentation particularly, happens by the people, and so that there is a camera shooting the image or the visual of the police shooting at you. So at least there is evidence of what had happened, because as we have seen later on, the whole matter can be turned upside down, and the people who were brutally killed would become like, the villains in the whole story. And the whole narrative is kind of turned upside down. I will talk about how, particularly in this matter, they turned it upside down. And it's something that we don't talk about and we don't discuss much, because that is what the story is, how Tata managed to turn the narrative around and ensure that that Kalinga Nagar is not discussed. What happened on 2nd January 2006 is not discussed. What happened before it is not discussed, and what happened after it is not discussed. Tata ensured that there is a complete media blackout. And when I say media blackout, I don't mean the media did not report about the incident as such. It did. In a very clinical way, it did. It mentioned the date and the numbers and the place, and with a statement from all parties, or the usual journalism did happen. But we never really saw much investigative work happening in Kalinga Nagar, except for one or two independent journalists or left-leaning publications. So, I mean, before I go any further, I would just like to say that I am not an expert, and we do not, on this channel, I have not done this format too many times, except for while discussing with other people. But the reason for doing this is not because I'm an expert, but because I'm a witness. I'm a witness to what has happened in Kalinga Nagar. I have seen many things with my own eyes. I have seen footage of many things that has been shot by the people, by the activists, by the tribal leaders. I have been reading a lot about the history of that place and, of course, what has been happening after that. And so, in a sense, I'm here to testify. I'm here to make my case against case for justice for Kalinga Nagar. So Kalinga Nagar, as I said earlier, it is located in the central in Odisha, central Odisha district, Jajpur. Jajpur happens to be in a very unique situation, considering that 98 or more percent of India's chromium ore is present in Jajpur district in one hill range, or rather one valley, Sukinda Valley. That makes Sukinda and Jajpur like one of the most important chromium reserves in the world. And I think I read it somewhere that even NASA and like America and all the powerful countries have their eyes on, when I say eyes, I mean the eye in the sky. And you can find some WikiLeaks references of Sukinda as well. So Sukinda is about 50 to 60 kilometers from this place called Kalinga Nagar. Now, Kalinga Nagar itself is a name that the government has given to an industrial estate that has been carved out of within Jajpur district by acquiring some thousands of acres of land from the mostly tribal people. The majority of the people there belong to the scheduled tribes, and also a large population of the scheduled castes and OBCs. And the thing is, so Sukinda Valley chromium exploitation has been happening for a very long time. I think from the 50s or 50s, it's been going on. And there are several companies involved in this, in the extraction of chromium, apart from Tata. So now, Kalinga Nagar is an industrial estate that is basically created in a way that it is very close to Sukinda Valley. And so the Kalinga Nagar Industrial Estate. The Kalinga Nagar Industrial Estate, it was launched by the government in the 90s. In that era, there was a bit of a kind of a competition between the Patnaiks of the two major parties of Odisha, that is Biju Patnaik, Naveen Patnaik's father, Biju Patnaik, or Vijayanand Patnaik, and Janaki Ballabh Patnaik of the Congress. Biju Patnaik had started with the Congress, but then he had moved on to the Janata Party during the emergency. So, one guy was promising that he would make 1,000 industries in 1,000 days. Another guy was promising something. So, in that competition, there was this declaration of an steel hub that would be created, India's biggest steel hub, where a land bank would be created for all the steel companies of the world to come and set up business. So for that, they started acquiring fertile agricultural land in Jajpur, near Dhuburi. And the first companies to set up were Mesco, Middle East Steel Company, which was also run into some sort of trouble. We'll talk about it some other time. But there were several small steel companies that came in, and there is a PSU, Neelachal Ispat, that also set up a plant there. And then came the big announcement that Tata would set up one of its biggest steel plants there. And it turns out that Tata would require almost half of Kalinga Nagar industrial estate. In fact, more than half, I would say, in its original plans. And it seemed as if the whole Kalinga Nagar industrial estate was just a kind of a smoke screen for Tata to come in. The reason being, Tata had got into a lot of trouble while acquiring land in another district of Odisha, that is Ganjam, and a conflict with, again, fertile land, a multi-crop fertile land, where the farmers were suppressed and the land was snatched. Farmers were killed, and Tata grabbed that land but did nothing in there. And it was, so Tata had this land with it in Ganjam, which was vacant. There was nothing happening there, but it wanted more land in Kalinga Nagar. So Tata comes in, signs MOU with Odisha government, and 2005 or 4, I think. And very hurriedly, they start their whole process of land acquisition. To start with, they did not even have it was not even time for land acquisition when they had started acquiring land, because public consultation had not been done properly. Just a month before, in December 2005, Tata had organized, the Pollution Control Board and Tata had organized a public hearing where hardly any of the project affected people or the people to be displaced were present. So it was mostly Tata's own supporters, government people, and company employees. And it was held in a place very far away, in violation of the basic guidelines of holding public hearings, that it should be accessible to the local people. But it wasn't. So at that point of time, in 2005, there was widespread outrage in Kalinga Nagar against land acquisition and steel factories, because by 2006, the local people had already seen more than a decade of steel plants and land acquisition and all of that. And they had understood very well that they were the biggest losers in this whole transaction. For instance, or rather, what I mean to say is that the biggest problem is that when Tata was acquiring land in 2006, it was acquiring land from people who had been, forcefully, or who had not consented to give the land away, but the government had forced some package upon them where the land was acquired at extremely low rates, 60,000-70,000 rupees for an acre. I could be wrong, but I think that was the original figure. And then there was some, later on when they were seeing that people were protesting, the government had said that they would add some, like another 50% more to it, which meant nothing actually. It was because the land was the main source of livelihood in that region. It was a fertile place, and people were very dependent on the produce of the land. The thing is that in Kalinga Nagar, the landowners were mostly scheduled tribe people, and the landless comprised of scheduled tribes and scheduled castes. So the so-called landless were actually traditional dwellers of that land. They had been traditionally cultivating, but from the colonial era to this era, that we know what has happened across the country about patta and land title and all of that. So on paper, most of them were seen as encroachers on government land. Nearly 50% of the population was kind of seen as encroachers on the government land. And that part of time, we did not have Forest Rights Act and such sort of rights over forest land and or land which has forest but is not categorized as forest land. So now this obsession of Odisha government, it's really an obsession of the Odisha government to carry out mining at any cost in Odisha is what led to this tragedy, or what led to this murder in Kalinga Nagar, the massacre in Kalinga Nagar. So this single-minded obsession of the government, it has a story. The story is that it starts from the colonial era when the British geologists started discovering huge reserves of coal, chromite, iron, bauxite across Odisha, and expressed interests to kind of exploit these reserves and have metal factories and all. The local elites of Odia society, they understood that this was a resource that would bring them, a lot of money. And around that time, they started manipulating records. This is pre-independence era. They started manipulating records and acquiring mountains, hills, entire hills, mountains by the name. And later what happened is that the British, it was around that point of time when there was a lot of criticism for the Industrial Revolution in British society. Of course, after Marx and the workers' movements happening across the factories of Europe had brought about a change in the ruling class there, that they had to find a more balanced way of industrialization. And therefore, they did not want to antagonize their subjects in their colonies across the world to further, a state of aggravated, rebellions. Already there was a lot of rebellion in all the colonies. So they refused to, they did not want to, create more factories in India. And they were not even very willing to invest in the factories of the Indian businessmen. So when the Tata, I tend to forget which one is which, but the first one who started the factory, the steel business. So I have read that he had first attempted to raise capital for the factory in London. And he was told in very clear terms that the Queen has given orders that mining and such industries are not to be encouraged by the British Empire in the colonies. And so Tata comes back to India and he takes the help of nationalist leaders and the Swadeshi movement to raise money for the steel factory. And so Tata came in as, pretending to be a nationalist sort of an entity that would, and these were ways of nation building. And when Tata surveyed Odisha and present-day Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, they found many sites which had ample iron ore reserves, which had rivers nearby where hydroelectric projects could be set up. And in fact, what many do not know, that the Hirakud Dam is built at the site which was first identified by Tata for their own hydroelectric project, because the first place where Tata wanted to set up its steel factory was not in Jamshedpur, but near Hirakud in Padampur. And at that point of time, the king of Mayurbhanj comes to know about Tata looking for land and mines and all of that, when he calls upon Tata and literally gives away a huge iron ore reserve in Mayurbhanj for free, for 1 or 2 rupees or 5 rupees, something like that, to Tata. And after finding that iron ore reserve in Mayurbhanj district of Odisha, northern Odisha, or rather it was the kingdom of Mayurbhanj, it's a princely state. So Mayurbhanj again is more, it's a tribal district, and has one of the most dense and diverse forests. So Goru Mahisani is the place where Tata starts its mines, and subsequently they discover a place which is now called Jamshedpur to set up a factory, and not very far from Goru Mahisani. So Tata was literally given a free iron ore mine to do this, because Tata comes up, made this image of itself as a nation, as a nationalist entity. I'm just going into this history because it all leads up to what happened in Kalinga Nagar. So around this time, Tata in its steel factory has to face a lot of, after the factory comes up in the early part of the 20th century, there are a lot of strikes by the workers at the Jamshedpur steel factory. And what Tata does there is a defining moment for our present day situation, because Tata brought in Mr. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi as its spokesperson. This is I'm not making this up. This is available material, and there's a speech that Mr. Gandhi makes there, in which he clarifies that he had gone there as to speak on behalf of the capitalist. And if you read that speech, it's quite shocking. It's the kind of speech that politicians of the party ruling at the center, they are often found making such speeches. You can find that speech online, and a lot of this information is available on Tata's own website. In fact, Tata's own website also tells you that Mr. Gandhi was being supported financially by the Tatas since his South Africa days. Much before, I think, Mr. Gandhi had an association with the Birlas. His association with the Tatas seems to be much older. In fact, not only Mr. Gandhi, at that point of time, I think in Jamshedpur, even Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was also called in by the Tatas to negotiate with the workers on strike. So the workers' problem in Jamshedpur continued for a long time. There were conflicts, people died, and the workers' movement did not find much support from Gandhians or even from other socialist leaders, because even people like J.P. Narayan, they all believed in this Gandhian concept of trusteeship, of like where the capitalist is the trustee of the poor. So this trusteeship model and the NGO that Tata had already set up, that is Tata Trusts. In fact, the three big NGOs of the world, or the trusts, that is Ford Foundation, Rockefeller, and Tata, they all were founded in the same year or within a gap of a year or so. So this model of trusteeship was something that the three biggest corporations of the world at that point of time knew, or rather knew that this model is going to enable them for a much longer run. The colonial era was coming to an end. They had to find a way to survive. Now, so now I'll come. Okay, this is very kind of back and forth and complicated. But now coming from now I'll just jump from that era to the 80s, when Odisha, it still remains to be amongst the 10 poorest states of the country. But the poverty in Odisha had suddenly grabbed a lot of attention in the early 80s with starvation and abject poverty in districts like Kolahandi, and the whole western and southern Odisha region. So that is the time when the big international NGOs like World Bank and foreign countries, or rather the imperialist forces, like imperialism today works through diplomacy. So what I'm talking about is the Ministry of, rather the Department for International Development of UK, DFID. So DFID and World Bank come to Odisha to, give us a roadmap out of poverty. And the roadmap that they give, which is the new industrial policy of Odisha, is that we have to sell our mines and, of course, take their loan, and then with that loan make roads from the mines to the coast and make ports on the coast, and so that we can very smoothly sell all the minerals that we have and become rich. So on paper, if you speak about it in such generalized terms, it sounds good, but it doesn't work out like that. And why it doesn't work out, we will discuss about it. Like why the economics of mining in Odisha is just, it's not any good economics. It's not capitalism. It's just a very medieval era colonialism. That's what's happening in Odisha right now. So we should not mistake it for some sort of a modern development, a model of modern development. It is not. That's not what the government is pushing ahead. So it is what the government in Odisha has been doing since then, irrespective of whichever party is in power, is to implement this, or rather to enable this loot of Odisha's mineral resources. So this policy change by World Bank and DFID comes in around the same time. JB Patnaik, Biju Patnaik have their kind of whole competition about who is going to bring in more industries to the state. The Kalinga Nagar industrial estate emerges, promises to be India's largest steel hub. And then it turns out that, well, it was a smokescreen, for yet another case of land grabbing by Tata. And when people protest, the same thing happens that happened in Gorumaisani, that happened in Gopalpur when with the farmers. The same thing had happened in Chilika Lake when Tata had tried to take over Chilika Lake as a monopoly fishing company, and several other places across the country. But as far as Odisha is concerned, from Gorumaisani to Kalinga Nagar, the experience with Tata has been the same, which is of forceful land acquisition, extreme brutality by the state security forces, and followed by a very clever twisting of the narrative. This twisting of the narrative emerges from the days when Tata could get Mr. Gandhi and Netaji Bose to negotiate on its behalf with the workers. So it's something that Tata has mastered over the last century. So the massacre that happened on 2nd January in 2006, there are a lot of fact-finding missions that try to find out Some people talked about the usage of mines and explosives by the police, while others said that there was no evidence for that. There were a lot of conflicting narratives about what had happened that day. But for a year after 2nd January, there was the people of 3 to 5 panchayats had come together and had put a blockade on the road. And this road was a national highway, and in fact, a very important highway for the mining business, because this was at that point of time, I think this was the only major road connecting the mines with the port at Paradip. And there used to be like kilometers long of lines of trucks that were just, stayed put on that road for days and nights. And to dissolve this barricade, to kind of resolve this situation, the Odisha government made a few promises to the people. The first promise that it made was that there would be a judicial probe into the massacre. The second promise was that the government would, see, I'm not remembering right now whether it was around that time or something, but at one point of time, the government also promised that it would restore the severed or the mutilated parts of the bodies of the martyrs. Because when the police or when the government sent the bodies back of the 12 people who had died by then, who died by the evening of second Monday. In total, 14 people were killed and one policeman. But two of the villagers died many days later, because they were being in a critical condition. They were being treated in hospitals, and they did not survive. So in total, 15 people, 12 people died on that day itself, and plus one policeman, and 2 more people did not survive and died during treatment many days later. So the 12 people whose bodies were returned, the bodies were received by the people in terribly mutilated condition. In fact, the private parts of all the bodies had been chopped off. The palms and feet had been chopped off. And I'm sorry for this sort of a very graphic description, but this is a very important part of the thing, because it was seen as adding insult to the injury. I mean, for the lack of a better expression, it was seen as a way to tell the people that that there is no respect for them, and they were being told that they had basically no human rights. And so later the government said that it would, the government first justified it, saying that this was part of the post-mortem, and also for DNA testing and identification they had taken these parts, and some sort of a story they made up like that. And so to solve the thing, the matter, they said that they would now return these body parts. And as a third uh, outcome, the government created a new resettlement and rehabilitation policy, which was not very different from what was there earlier, but it only kind of had sort of updated the compensation packages and made it more elaborate. But the government claimed that it was a revolutionary act and that it addressed all the concerns of the people. What it did not acknowledge is that the new R&R policy makes no stance about forced evictions. So the forced evictions which were being carried out at that point of time by the Colonial Era Land Acquisition Act of 1894. The new act had not come in. So in 2007, when the road blockade was lifted, and I'm just trying to recall actually. So from 2007 to 2009, these 2 years, the government was slightly on the back foot. There was not very heavy police action as such, but a new police station was made. More forces were deployed in the area. Tata's contractors started buying land and setting up their businesses in the area. And a lot of small cash started, like people were being given incentives to do small things and, create a dependency. And a lot of alcohol, not shops, but these were like dhabas that the companies, contractors, and all the supporters they had set up, where people were encouraged to come and drink and eat, and that life would change if you would just let Tata do whatever it wants to do. So those 2 years, it was a kind of the people organized in the local area. They organized as a movement, and the Vistapan Virodhi Janmanch became a very an organization with several members in the area. The youth, the senior citizens all joined. The women, they all came together, and Vistapan Virodhi Janmanch became a strong voice of dissent, a strong voice of reason rather, and the strongest voice against injustice. And so around that point of time, the movement started getting a lot of solidarity from other political groups as well, other political parties, left parties, opposition parties, and even banned organizations like the Maoist parties. So this extension of solidarity from certain Maoist parties was kind of picked out by the state as a clear case of guilt by association, and all the tribal leaders of Kalinga Nagar became Maoists overnight, according to the police. My argument has always been that if a Maoist activist has extended solidarity to the movement, even BJP, Bharatiya Janata Party activists had also extended their solidarity to the movement. Except for the Biju Janata Dal's leaders, even the BJP at first was not extending any solidarity, but after they broke alliance with, after Naveen Patnaik broke alliance with the BJP, even BJP leaders started extending solidarity. Even Congress leaders have. So expressing solidarity, the people cannot stop others from expressing solidarity. So anyway, what happened then is that many leaders were arrested, jailed, incarcerated, and framed in many false cases. One of the tallest leaders of the movement, Sini Soyji, who is the mother of Bhagwan Soy, a martyr of the 2nd January 2006, and she was fighting for justice for her son, but the police, but the Odisha government framed her as a hardcore Maoist. I still remember reading in the newspapers, hardcore Maoist woman leader arrested. And it was Sini Soy, the mother of Bhagwan Soy, a mother who was just demanding for justice for her son and for her people. And the main thing is that people were already aware of the impact of such kind of industrialization. It was not, they were not, it was an informed dissent. It was not a case, as has been made out of, people of Luddites versus development. No, the people of Kalinga Nagar were not people who hate machines. They are not people who hate modernism and modernity and all of that. In fact, most of the youth tribal leaders of Bistapan Birodhi Janmanch were highly educated, graduates, postgraduates, and they were all looking for a good life and a good job. And they're like us. So this whole narrative of people against development was built by the media. Now, when the media game started, they created a terminology in the vernacular press they called Sapakhyavadi and Vipakhyavadi. So it started as supporters of the movement and the opposers, the protesters. Very quickly, the protesters were, that word was replaced with Maoist. And this allowed the government to carry out another wave of terrible, violent, brutal repression a few years after 2006. This is when the UPA government, Manmohan Singh is at the center, and he makes that very famous or infamous statement of the Maoists being the greatest internal security threat. And then we see the launch of the so-called Operation Green Hunt. Now, what Operation Green Hunt did was that it sort of Um, the police force, the deployment of security personnel in Kalinga Nagar doubled and tripled overnight. There was the the movement of the opposition, the Operation Green Hunt troops. We do not know what happened, who went where, but this is what they did. This thousands of paramilitary soldiers were kind of brought in, and entire villages were surrounded by thousands of paramilitary soldiers who were armed with mostly pellet guns. This is before the whole thing in Kashmir that happened with pellets. This was happening in Kalinga Nagar. In fact, happening around the same time, because I have heard from police sources. In fact, not heard. In fact, I know that the police team that was involved in kind of this in dealing with Kalinga Nagar has had some experience with Kashmir as well. I'm talking about the IPS officers. So I'll not get into very specifics there because it's very hard to really verify, but they're using the same thing as they're doing there or everywhere. That's its usual military tactic, area domination, and whatever terms that they use. So in 2000, around from 2009 to 2010, we see another wave, maybe even more brutal than 2nd January 2006, but it did not have a body count like that. They were targeted assassinations, and several attempts. In fact, there have been many instances of really brave actions by the leaders who have fearlessly faced hitmen hired to kill them, their families, all of that, and also very compassionately treated whenever their could have been assassins have been caught. They've all never been really, beaten or, in fact, most of them were handed over to the police in front of the media. Several of these instances that I'm talking about, we have videos of it, and it's there also. Some of it is all there on this YouTube channel. And I think I've made a playlist of Kalinga Nagar where you would find several of these videos. So this is, I have come from 2006 to 2010. See, that's the thing about Tata, if the same thing had been done by Vedanta or POSCO or Mittal, it would have made, or Adani, of course, it would have made a lot of news. Because the reporting of corporate crime in India is also decided by the corporates, which crime is to be reported and which is to be not, which company is to be the bad company and who is supposed to be the good company. The media, as we all know, is a corporate run affair. Even this YouTube thing is a corporate run thing. So it is the corporates deciding which corporate is good and which corporate will be bad. And in the case of Kalinga Nagar, we have a very detailed history of how the media has been used. So around the same time, the Neerja Radia tapes come out. And I was just going through the tapes and listening for if I could find something interesting. And suddenly I hear, I think she was talking to Veer Sanghvi. And not sure, I'm just remembering it from the top of my head. I think it was Veer Sanvi. And she says something about fighting the Maoists in Kalinga Nagar. And then later on from that, I got the clue from that. And from then I did some research in Bhubaneswar, and I found out that Neera Radia's company has quite a lot of presence in Odisha and Kalinga Nagar. And they were really involved in, networking with the journalists and influencing the stories. So around the same time, I as a filmmaker, as a media activist, or whatever you may say, but my work at that point of time was often to share my findings with everybody, just on email. And there was no WhatsApp and all of that. We used to send emails, if you remember those email lists and all of that. So I would send news from Kalinga Nagar, Dinkia, and Niyamgiri, of course. But I would see that most of the media guys and even activists would mostly, outside Odisha mostly, would pick up only the matter of Vedanta and POSCO and never Tata. In fact, some of them would, some of them have even, when they have visited Niyamgiri or Dinkia, and I've happened to be with them, they have told me that Tata is not that bad. So that's when I got into this whole thing of there is a good and a bad in capitalism. Within companies. So the whole point here is that Tata has mastered the art of being the good company. It can get away with Kalinga Nagar, it can get away with Singur, and it will never become a company that has got nation, that is shamed across the nation, like Adani today. Most of the, almost every left-leaning or a liberal person in this country would have only bad things to say about Adani, or how Adani is taking over democracy, and or how Adani is running the show, is the puppet master. That is. I would find it funnier, but the concern is that it's a very dangerous assumption that everybody has made, that Adani is the bad company and all these other companies are great companies. The thing is that we have this tendency to demonize things, and also, while at the same time find some other thing and put it on the pedestal. But let's look at it objectively. It's a matter of the constitution, it's a matter of laws and who is breaking the law. It's not about the character of Ratan Tata or some Ghanshyam Birla or Gautam Adani or whoever. What happened in Kalinga Nagar was illegal land acquisition, it was a massacre, and every player, every actor that enabled this massacre is responsible, is guilty, and action should have been taken. But the judicial probe that for years went on dilly-dallying the whole matter, and several times the composition of the members was changed till they found somebody who could, or the right people. Well, I do not agree with what the probe said. So I will very openly say that it was a biased report. The judicial probe was a complete sellout. It basically said that nobody was to be blamed for what happened on 2nd January 2006. And rather, it made a case against the people to have taken law in their hands, to have, basically been misled to oppose this project. So the judicial probe, in its verdict, said that nobody was to be blamed. The bureaucrats who were in charge of the district at that point of time, the SP and the collector, had immediately been rewarded with better posting, and ever since they have made great progress in their careers. In fact, the collector of Jajpur at that point of time was the same person who had personally carried out illegal and forceful evictions in Lanjigad, in the Footfield, in Kalahandi district, to establish the Vedanta factory. So he had been brought there to grab land in Kalinga Nagar at any cost. And he had, proven his mettle. So after the Operation Green Hunt time, when thousands of paramilitary soldiers were deployed there, there was the movement was kind of broken. Vistapan Birodhi Janmanch could not operate the way it used to operate because the people had been put in a situation where they, for their own survival, they had to stop protesting. This was living inside an area of 3 to 4 panchayats and not being able to come out of that area. There was an economic blockade, so they could not buy anything from outside or sell their things outside. Most importantly, they were afraid of going to hospitals. Man, woman, or anybody. Pregnant women were also afraid of, going to hospitals to deliver the children because of they would get arrested or they would get harassed. There was no way they would escape the repression. And of course, when the paramilitary attacked them and they realized that, in fact, when the paramilitary attacked, the paramilitary destroyed food stocks, destroyed all things inside the house, kitchen. The video is there, you can see it. So after that, the movement, did not have that sort of a strength. The people were really broken. And also, in this period from 2006 to 2010-11, there were all those people from the day of the 2nd January who had sustained serious injuries and had never got treatment. And so they continued to suffer and many lost their lives because of not being able to get treatment. We have no count of that. And secondly, due to these kind of socioeconomic blockades and restrictions and this state of fear, a lot of people started getting different kind of diseases, especially elder people. The the depression, the trauma, all of that had its own impact on everybody's health. So several people died, and yeah, I just that there was a time when started receiving videotapes of only funerals of people dying of from disease. Now the thing is, disease in that area is not just because of psychosomatic reasons or mental health reasons or this sort of a repressive atmosphere. It was already a big problem in that area. Around 2007-8, when I started visiting that place, I went to several villages which, which were supporting factories and were working and were located next to factories for which they had given up their land. But all those, half of the population in every village was all like at least one or two villages I saw where 30, 40, 50 people had just died mysteriously, not mysteriously, like clearly from the impact of the several industries that have been concentrated, steel plants working next to each other in one location. Kalinga Nagar is it's one of the most polluted places in the country. And as I had said, it is located next to Sukinda Valley. Sukinda Valley, with its chromite mining, is considered to be amongst the 10 most polluted places of the world. And in Kalinga Nagar, we have several steel factories, many of them sharing the same wall, boundary wall. You're not supposed to have factories next to each other like that. You're supposed to have some sort of a buffer zone. And to expect people to live in that area for villages which have not been displaced, which have managed to see, this is another dilemma of many of the places that I have witnessed where such conflict has emerged against land acquisition, is that a company wants to get, let's say, 5,000 acres of land. It gets 2,500 acres because that's what most companies do. They always ask for 10 times more land that they can